Today we're going to learn how to paint non-metallic metal. Sort of. I've been painting for a little while now, but I've yet to take on the challenge of NMM. No, that's not short for nude male modeling. NMM stands for non-metallic metals. It's a painting technique in which you make a model appear to have a metallic surface without actually using any paint with metallic pigment in it, like lead belcher, for example. Before I started this endeavor, as I always do, I did a little research. I trolled YouTube, I did a little Google foo.
Why you wanna kick me?
And I even looked at some paintings that I had around the house. I'd like to start by mentioning that I'm learning non-metallic metal technique along with you, and I'm far from a pro. However, I feel this is a good foundation for building on the NMM skill set. I've sketched the axe that we'll be painting up in this video, and let's start by breaking down the individual surfaces of the axe into parts. Essentially, this axe has two main parts. It's got flat areas and rounded areas. You can see that this particular model is almost entirely made up of flat or beveled pieces. Where the handle meets the axe head, you'll notice is our only rounded part, that with the rivets there. Now, since we've got these pieces divided, we can plan our highlights. I'm using an easy two-tone transition from dark to light colors. This is not a realistic simulation for how light works, but I think it will give you a good reference point to build on. As each surface transitions into the next, I reverse the direction of shading, dark to light. On the rounded surfaces, we start with a darker color at the parts that are physically more distant from the eye, and work towards lighter colors as those points get closer to us. Again, this is not the most realistic way to represent light and reflection, but it does give us some nice contrast and color dynamics. I'm starting out with 5 identical dwarf models, and I'm going to number them appropriately. I wanted to do this on identical models so I can track my progress as I go along, and also see if I did anything that I liked on one model more so than the other. I started out just using 3 colors, a black, a white, and kind of a navy blue. I think it's called heavy blue for Vallejo. And thinned down my paints. The blue was already pretty thin, so I didn't have to do much there, but the white was extra chunky, so I really let it have it. I then start to put some base coats down. And on these models, I just had them primed just a flat gray using Vallejo airbrush primer. And being this was my first model, I had done a little research, but not a ton. Instead of using more of a glazing technique like you'll see some folks do, I went straight into just wet blending here. And I really didn't have a plan at all. I just started tucking colors in anywhere I thought would be appropriate. I was trying to keep my highlights up high, and one of the mistakes I really made on the first model was I used a lot of darker colors. I think for a more realistic look, you probably want to stay on the lighter end of the spectrum and just use your darker colors for shadowing. And here we've got the results of my round 1 painting. I think it turned out okay. Let's see if we can improve on it. Here I'm starting out base coating the axe in Fenrissian Grey. I wanted to start lighter on the second round. I noticed my first model came out a little darker and more blue than I intended, so I base coat in Fenrissian Grey, and then I start using Administratum Grey to highlight. You'll notice almost immediately I'm being a little more particular with where my highlights are going. At this point I haven't really figured out exactly where they look the best and where I'm hunting for contrast at, but I definitely felt more comfortable on the second time. The first model took me maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours for just the blending on the axe. Here I'm adding some contrast too with some incubi darkness that I've got thinned down really nice and thin. And although I started out pretty light on this axe, you'll see that I wound up with a pretty dark tone overall. But one thing I picked up on immediately is your paints almost can't be thin enough for this NMM technique. Having the thin paints just really gives you nice smooth blends and makes those transitions look a little more clean. You'll notice too I'm also doing some edge highlighting with just pure white here. The highlighting, especially on the darker areas, really makes this model pop out. And this model too actually wound up being one of my favorites that I was able to produce. It's probably the least realistic looking, but I think it turned out really well. And this is only my second attempt, so I was honestly a little scared to even attempt non-metallic metal, but it's not that bad, I promise. Here you see I'm just adding some little dots of white for highlights. Yeah, I think that turned out great. This one took less time, I think maybe around an hour and 15 for this. And most of that is me just wasting time going back and forth. So I liked my base coat of Fenrissian Grey on the last one, so I'm diving straight back in there on model number 3. I'm using a heat gun too to help dry these paints. You gotta be careful with heat guns, especially on thinner parts. This is a chonky boy, but on models with real thin swords and horns and stuff, you can definitely melt and warp those things, so just be careful. The heat gun may be a little hot too. Maybe I should switch to a hair dryer. I sabotaged my wife's, so she'll get a new one, I'll get a new one. So same process here. This time I'm sketching out my highlights. You'll see a little thicker than before and a little more specifically. Paying more attention to the upper edges of the blade. I'm still trying to throw in some down low as the light bounces around the edge. But I found that these are it's a little harder to blend that way. This is a really tiny axe, and I was having difficulty transitioning there, but I'm sure some of that will just improve as my blending skills get better. A lot of this isn't necessarily knowing what you're doing as much as it is playing around and practicing and learning from your mistakes. So you can see that blue wash gave some nice contrast there in the recesses of the axe, and I'm just coming back along with some highlights. So it's essentially just the same thing here as I did on the other ones. It's me adding highlights, adding darker colors, adding highlights, adding shadows, and just trying to find a happy medium with my blends. And here's the result of round number 3. I think it turned out okay. There's not a lot of contrast there. I think it could have done with some more edge highlighting, a little more shadowing there. Round 4, I'm mixing it up. I'm going a little darker on my base coat. I think I'm using Altdorf Blue and Fenrissian Grey just to make a little bit darker, cool blue gray color. I'm laying down my highlights there with Administratum Grey, just in a pure form. This one on number 4, I'm a little more confident with where I'm laying down my highlights, and this one definitely goes a lot faster than the previous ones. If you'll notice, I'm trying to keep to my rule of rotating which way the light travels as I move on to each element of the axe, each flat part that we defined earlier. And I think that helps almost immediately add a little confidence with my painting. That's something I didn't really pick up on until I watched a few more videos. It's just something I noticed from a lot of people's work. I don't even know if they know that they're doing it, but it's, like I said earlier, it's not a super realistic way of how light reacts on reflective surfaces, but it is a good way of getting some quick contrast. You can see I screwed it up there. If you just take your time at first too and put those highlights where you want and then worry about the blending later, I think that helps a ton. So I was pretty happy with how number 4 turned out. You can see I've got some pretty stark highlights there, which doesn't really look that realistic, but from a distance on the table, especially under normal lighting, I think it looks pretty cool. Alright, big round 5. This I definitely had more confidence going into. This is pretty much the point where I knew exactly where I wanted my highlights. I knew what colors I liked, what colors I thought worked well, and I just started laying these bad boys down. On round 4, I think it took maybe, I don't know, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But round 5 went much quicker. I think I completed the whole axe blade in about, I think it was 18 minutes maybe. But this is mostly just, I mean, it's the 5th one of the exact same model that I did and attempted. So if you've got some extra bits laying around that are all identical, just maybe a weapon choice that you didn't use for an army, those are great ones to prime up and practice on. Because you don't have to have a wide range of paints, you don't need any crazy special brushes. I used a lot of cheap brushes for this one. And I was honestly really happy with how everything turned out. The color choice I know is a little odd, especially for dwarfs. My buddy Brent there at Coopertown, he mentioned that I could just say it was mithril, which is a good observation. Thank you, Brent. Yeah, so you can see I'm laying down some highlighting there. I'm getting those sharp contrasts on the colors from light to dark. And honestly, I could have probably went a little more black or dark gray with the shadowing on this, but I wanted to keep it kind of light and fresh. So that's why I'm pretty much focusing on the lighter scale here of the whites and blues and light grays. Okay, you can see that I finished that in 18 minutes, so down from 2 hours on my first attempt. And there I've got the model all painted up, and that definitely helps too. If you're feeling discouraged about your non-metallic metal, try painting up some of the other colors around. Just the contrast of like that wooden handle really helps make the parts of the axe pop. Here you'll see I've got all 5 of my big fat boys lined up, and the style varies greatly. I was really happy with how number 4 turned out. I like actually how number 2 turned out as well. So I'm going to take a few aspects from those and try this again eventually, and hopefully make a more in-depth tutorial video once I get it figured out. So that's it. I hope you'll give this technique a try, although it's going to be tough to master, I can tell. It's not hard at all to practice. Everybody's got weapon bits laying around, so get out a few of your paints and give it a try. I did this with cheap brushes and just some paints I already had. Get creative with your colors, mix it up, try different things. It's really fun to try, and not as hard as you think it will be. As always, I really appreciate you hanging out with me, and I love that we can learn something new together. I hope you'll consider subscribing and all that jazz, and drop a comment below and let me know what you'd like to see me do next. Remember, stay sane out there, be kind to one another, and have a great day. We'll catch you next time. Bye.